Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're jumping right into a pretty interesting executive order, signed late Friday afternoon, sort of slipped in there.
Yeah, this Friday drops.
Exactly. So our mission for you listening is pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Let's unpack the core elements of this order and, figure out why it's kicking up so much dust.
And to do that, we're drawing from a Fox News segment. It had a host talking with Jay Sekulow and Lanny Davis. So different perspectives right from the start.
Definitely. And what immediately caught people's eye was this claim, this idea, that the order gives the president, well, absolute power.
Absolute power, yeah, over pretty much any and all American resources.
And not just in a crisis,
Yeah.
right? Even in peacetime, that's the striking part.
Right, we're talking food, water, energy.
Livestock, health resources, transportation, even construction stuff.
And how everyday goods, applicable services in the civilian market
Right.
are distributed. It sounds incredibly broad.
It really does. But then you have the White House response. Jay Carney, the press secretary at the time,
Mm-hmm.
apparently just laughed off a question about it, called it a fairly standard and routine piece of business.
Standard and routine.
But, that hasn't really quieted the concerns. Some folks are looking at this and saying, hang on, this could give the president the power to declare something like martial law, even without a clear national crisis.
So you've got this real clash. Routine business versus a potentially huge expansion of power.
Precisely. Let's dig into those details.
Okay, so context is key here, right? This whole idea of the president having some authority over resources in emergencies.
Yeah.
It's not entirely new,
No, Sekulow mentioned that in the segment. Presidents have had similar powers going back decades.
right? Since the 1950s, actually. He named names, too.
Yeah, Bill Clinton, Eisenhower, George W. Bush. They all signed orders related to national defense resource preparedness.
So the basic concept. It has precedent.
Okay, so if the concept isn't new, what is different about this specific order? What's causing the stir now?
Well, the big thing, the crucial change, it seems, is tying in the Stafford Act.
Ah, the Stafford Act. Both Sekulow and the host flagged that one.
Exactly. Sekulow argued that bringing in the Stafford Act gives the president much broader authority than any of the previous acts. That's a direct quote.
Much broader authority. Okay, so break that down. Why is the Stafford Act incorporation such a potential game changer? What's it usually for?
Well, the Stafford Act is, it's the main federal law for disaster relief. Think hurricanes, floods, earthquakes.
Okay, so helping states and local areas after major disasters.
Right. And Sekulow's point, as I understood it, is that by weaving that into an order about national resources for defense, you potentially give the president really extensive powers in situations that aren't, traditional national security threat.
Like a foreign attack or something.
Exactly. He did mention checks and balances exist, of course.
Right.
But the scope of authority is what's really under the microscope here, because
Yeah.
the definition of national defense used in this order,
It's wider.
it seems broader than it has ever been under any of these previous executive orders. That's another key quote. This expanded definition is really the crux of the concern.
And they pointed to a specific part, didn't they? Section 801J.
Yes, that's the one. Section 801J identified as containing this broader definition.
And the fundamental question people are asking is, why? Why change it now?
Exactly. What's the justification for widening the definition of national defense in this context?
And then there's the timing again. Dropping it late on a Friday.
Yeah, that definitely raised some eyebrows. It's a classic move, really, if you want something to get less immediate attention.
Lanny Davis even kind of joked about it, right? Releasing stuff at 10:00 on July 3rd or something.
He did. The idea being, people are heading into the weekend, maybe a holiday weekend, less media focus. It can minimize scrutiny.
So the timing itself kind of feeds into the suspicion for some.
It certainly contributes to the narrative for those already concerned.
Now, the segment highlighted different types of concerns, didn't it? Coming from different political perspectives.
Yes, absolutely. From a more left-leaning viewpoint, the concern mentioned was maybe this is prep for a potential conflict. Iran was mentioned.
Ah, securing energy resources and the like in case of war.
That was the angle presented. And then from the conservative side,
Let me guess, executive overreach.
pretty much the worry about unchecked power concentrated in the executive branch. Less about a specific war, more about the principle of it.
But Lanny Davis pushed back on that, didn't he? He seemed less alarmed.
He did. His argument was, look, presidents need authority to act fast in real emergencies. He mentioned, a nuclear attack, another 9/11 type event.
And he pointed out this kind of authority isn't new, previous presidents had it.
Right, and he expressed confidence, basically, that President Obama wouldn't misuse this power.
He also kind of suggested the loudest voices were maybe jumping the gun, the extremes on the left and the right.
Yeah, his phrasing was they're quick to jump beyond the facts and look at the worst possible interpretation. He framed it as maybe more about existing political biases than the text itself.
But Jay Sekulow brought up some other points, sort of context, that he felt fueled the suspicion.
He did. He circled back to the Friday document dump timing
Right.
and then connected it to other ongoing controversies at the time. He mentioned the Attorney General and the Fast and Furious situation, concerns about the NYPD.
Okay, so creating a broader picture of mistrust, maybe.
That seemed to be his point, that these other issues create an atmosphere where people are already suspicious of the administration's motives.
He also mentioned things he saw as constitutional issues, like those recess appointments to the National Labor Board.
Yes, arguing that not going through the standard Senate confirmation process, the very specific process, showed a willingness to bypass checks and balances.
And the healthcare mandate debate was tied in, too.
Right, cited as another example where there were strong disagreements about constitutional limits on power. Sekulow's overall point was that this background noise, this context, naturally leads to suspicion about this executive order.
It really touches on that fundamental disagreement about the Constitution itself, doesn't it? Is it a living document or something more fixed?
Exactly. The segment hinted at that. Sekulow, representing a more conservative view, suggested maybe sometimes checks and balances and separation of powers get downplayed if you view the Constitution as highly flexible.
So how you view the Constitution itself shapes how you see an order like this.
Absolutely. It filters your interpretation of its potential impact.
But even with these concerns about broadened authority, there are still checks, right? It's not like the president operates in a vacuum.
No, definitely not. And Sekulow acknowledged that too. You still have Congress. You have a very active media. I mean, we're talking about a segment analyzing it right now.
True.
And crucially, executive orders can be challenged in court. So those safeguards are still in place.
Okay. But still, that central worry seems to stick, this overly broad definition of national defense.
Right. And linking it to the Stafford Act, bringing in things like disaster relief tsunamis was an example used, things far removed from traditional military threats.
And the question remains,
Yeah.
why was that necessary? Presidents already have power to respond to disasters.
That's the core puzzle. What specific gap was this trying to fill? Why bundle disaster response authority under this National Defense Resources umbrella?
Yeah, it was clear from the discussion people see this very differently depending on their perspective. It can get very partisan. Did they try to sort of step back from that?
I think there was an effort, yes, to acknowledge the different viewpoints left-right without fully endorsing the most extreme takes.
Okay.
They stressed focusing on the facts, the actual text, and warned about, political polarization driving the narrative.
Someone mentioned not liking extreme rhetoric from either side.
Yes, that came up. A call for less heat, more light, essentially.
Yeah.
And context was added, like pointing out that Republican presidents also faced criticism for things like recess appointments.
Right, it's not always a one-sided issue.
And the point about the Supreme Court being the ultimate arbiter on big constitutional questions, like the Affordable Care Act, not commentators.
So let the legal process play out.
Exactly. The vibe was, let's analyze this carefully, understand the changes, but maybe avoid immediately assuming the absolute worst-case scenario based on politics.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this for everyone listening. We have this executive order. It does grant broad powers over national resources.
Yes, building on older orders, but with a key difference.
That difference being the expanded definition of national defense, specifically by incorporating the Stafford Act.
Which potentially pulls a wider range of civilian emergencies, like natural disasters, under this umbrella.
And that expansion, plus the late Friday release,
has definitely generated concern across the board. Worries about executive power, potential overreach, the balance between branches of government.
But the big question mark still hanging there is, why?
Exactly. Why the change? What was the specific reason for broadening that definition and bringing in the Stafford Act now? That hasn't been clearly answered, at least not in the discussion we looked at.
Right. So that leaves a crucial thought for you, the listener. How do you see this balance? The need for a president to have emergency powers versus the risk of those powers becoming too broad, too easily invoked.
What safeguards do you think are most critical when that kind of authority is granted?
And maybe, how do we stay informed and engaged in this discussion about executive power without just falling into, partisan camps. Something to mull over.
Definitely food for thought.
That's our deep dive for today. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.